Welcome back to the Grove. Today, we cap it all off with the biggest piece yet. I'm so excited, and I've been hinting at it for the last couple of episodes as we've built this place up, gotten all the mushrooms in here, gotten all of the details. We did the house, of course, first, and now it is time for the biggest piece of it all. I mentioned towards the later part of the last episode what it was going to be, and now that we know, I can mention it a little more openly. We're going to be building a huge Jacaranda tree here. I still don't know if I'm pronouncing that right, but either way, I've got a really cool inspiration image of one from real life that I'm going to be using to try and construct a massive version that fills the sky over top this grove right here and starts to put some of it in shade, but more than anything, provides a huge sight line in the sky right here from anywhere you are in this area, whether you're right underneath it, whether you're approaching from the pathway, whether you're up here on the hill, or even if you're all the way back over there and you're traveling over from where we have our house set up, or even where we will have our third area where you can see some of our farms at the moment. The idea is that you'll be able to see it from pretty much anywhere you are around this area, and that is a lot like the spire that we built a handful of episodes ago. Now, this build right here, as many of you seen in the episodes that we spent on it, is all about setting the stage for the medieval area of this world off in this direction right here. And more specifically, it's about making you feel something. Now, what that is entirely dependent on each and every one of you. It's not going to be the same from person to person. But at the end of the day, it's big enough, grand enough, looming off in the distance and visible from so many different areas that it, without a doubt, makes you feel something whenever you see it in the background. At least background in the future when we have more things built. Right now, it's very much foreground, but you get the idea. Eventually, we're going to build up some more things out here, and it will become a little bit of a background piece, or at least something that's always there, even if it's not the main focus if you're closer to some other builds that have your attention. But to get back to the point, the idea is that it's visible from pretty much anywhere. And that is really going to be one of the staples of this part of the world right here. I've mentioned before that we're going to have three different areas. We have the fantasy area, we have the medieval area over here, and then the mystery third area, which I haven't gotten to, but that's going to be over in that direction. Now, we kind of have our starter area right here, which is sort of its own little thing that is definitely over in the fantasy side, but also a little bit removed from the rest of what we're going to be doing over there. And so that's kind of its own thing, right? Over here in the medieval side, we have our big piece. We have our main thing that's definitely going to be capturing your attention whenever it's in render distance. What we're doing today is we're building something similar, something with similar purposes and goals and in similar scale over in the fantasy area. We are practically putting together the spire of that part of the world. It just so happens that the spire of that part of the world is going to be a massive tree, and yes, even bigger than the tree that we built overlooking our starter home right there. We're going even bigger and even better. So I'm super excited to get that started. However, it is going to require a lot of materials. The material list is going to be a little comparable to the spire. It's not as bad, but it's still going to be a lot. So I need to go to the desert and absolutely lay waste to the place. So here in the base of the spire, it is a good thing we set all of this up when we did, because of course we have a ton of rockets that have been being made over on this side with the auto crafters, but of course we also have a little bit of an output of regular gunpowder, as well as of course the sugarcane for whenever we need them. Now, when it comes to laying waste to the entire desert, I find that my favorite way and the best way to do that is with a bunch of TNT. Sure, I could take a shovel. However, the return rate on the TNT, assuming you have a good enough supply of gunpowder, is enough to make it worth it. You'll go through a stack of TNT, and that'll get you close to, if not more, than an entire shulker box of sand, which is plenty. So we're going to go the TNT route and absolutely destroy everything. Okay, so maybe that was just a little bit anticlimactic. I didn't realize that I already had all the sand I would ever need just sitting in storage from old terraforming projects. But at that point, I had already talked about the TNT and blowing the desert up and even made the TNT. And you can't just have all of that TNT and talk about blowing everything up. without actually blowing everything up. That's just the rule, so I had to do it anyway. So I threw a stack at it, but regardless, here we are back in the grove, and we are at this point just about ready to get started. We've got all of our materials right here. As a matter of fact, earlier today, I just did a stream over on Twitch in this world where we finished prepping all of the materials that we were going to need to put this together, and as you can see, it is quite a lot of purple and pink. This is going to make up the canopy, the leaves up top, and I'm super excited because I think that splotch of purple and pink up in the sky is going to complement everything else we've done in this area really, really well. One of the things you may have noticed is that we did not add any purple mushrooms or pink or really anything on that scale. The closest we got was the white one down in the stump where we used a little bit of pink colors, but I mostly mean for the caps. We did a lot of some other colors. We've got the reds, the browns, the blues, even the oranges, but I left purple and pink out because we are going to fill the sky with the canopy of this tree. And if you're anything like me, you probably thought that in the mushroom episode, it could really use a purple and white spotted mushroom, just like the kind in Stardew. You know the one, you thought of it too, don't lie. And yes, it would have looked really good out here. However, I knew the tree was coming and I knew that was going to be a whole lot of purple in the sky, so I didn't want to go too overboard, and that is going to be where we get that splotch of color to show through. So with all of that said, we now have everything we need to put it together. We know where we're going to put it together, right up there on the hill behind my head. We've got everything ready and planned out. The only thing left to do is actually get started. All right, before we get too far ahead of ourselves on building the tree, I wanted to take a moment to pause and kind of talk a little bit about the setup that we've got going on right here. I could, of course, build the whole thing all in one go, but what fun is that when I can kind of explain what we're doing as we go about doing it? So I want to split the tree up into a couple of different portions. The beginning portion right here is the stump of it, up into where it begins to kind of branch off, I guess. I don't know if there's like a term for that or whatever, but this area right here, this isn't going to have any branches. This is just the base of the tree itself, and then you can see a little bit of what we did with some of the roots sprawling around the top of the mountain there. So to get a better view of it, I'm up here on top of the mushroom that overhangs above the pathway down there, and you can see what I went for with these roots. I wanted to go for something that felt lively, both feeling like natural roots that you might see out of a tree, especially one that's on a slope like this, but also something fun and a little whimsical as well. And so we've got a lot of these roots that kind of poke up halfway through the ground, and it's meant to feel like a lot of the root is kind of submerged, but because of the slope we're on, a lot of it kind of sticks up and juts out a little bit, right? And then of course over here we have part of it that kind of flares out away from the ground, and I thought that would be a pretty cool little touch if we had a little bit of it removed, like it kind of came out of the ground and then needed to find its way back, so it kind of shot back into the dirt. Now, I don't know how realistic that really is. I haven't really done my research on how trees work and tree roots and trees that are on slopes like this or anything like that, but I do think it looks cool. And I think we can apply a little bit of a rule of cool here, even if it isn't the most realistic thing ever. Nonetheless, we do have a little bit of a start right up here as to where I think I'm going to start doing the first branch. And I started a little bit on it, and then I was like, wait, no, maybe I should explain this just a little bit. The block palette that we're going to be using for the tree here is a lot of this gray color right here, a mix of acacia bark, we've got tuff, and we've got cobblestone. And I've got those three blocks mixed throughout. I did not do that in a shading sort of context. This is very much a sort of scattered texture kind of approach. It's very blobby. I didn't want to go too like scatter textured, And so anytime you see any of these blocks, they're usually in some form of a kind of 3 or 4 or sometimes 5 block wide sort of blob, I guess is the right word. And I think that what that's going to add to the tree is that from a distance, you're going to see the surface of the tree and all of the limbs and everything varied up that ever so slight amount just by these different shades and slightly different textures of this grayscale palette. And I think it's going to add a lot to the tree. I didn't want to focus too much on shading with it. I didn't want to get that detailed with it, as I didn't think it would really shine through, especially once we have the canopy in place up top. And a lot of it is going to be covered by shade from, of course, the leaves and the other blocks that aren't necessarily leaves that are casting a shadow from above. Regardless, I wanted to talk this over a little bit with you guys before we continue to get a little bit further and really start to flesh out all of the branches on the area, just so you could kind of see where my mind is at. From up here, you can see a little bit better just what we're aiming for with the tree kind of coming out at this 45-ish degree angle. It's kind of heading right towards the house over there, and that's very intentional. Once we get all of the branches in place, we're going to have some of them right over top of the house, although, you know, a lot higher up in the sky. And eventually, as we start to fill it all out, a lot of this area down here is going to be partially cast in shadow, with the occasional little spot of light coming up from the very surface up there, shining through, and I think it'll create a really, really cool effect once you're down at ground level. It has been done, at least up to this point. We've got the entirety of the tree in place minus the capping off detail, which is of course all of the leaves and foliage up top. So there's a couple of things I want to show before we take any further steps. I think if I stand up here on top of this little mountainside that we built recently, that'll be a pretty good spot to kind of go over all of the details here. So one of the first things that you'll probably notice, and something that's definitely a lot different from what we did with the tree over at our starter house right off in the distance that way, is that I've used a lot more full blocks and I haven't used any stairs, slabs, or trapdoors in the making of this. Now, the biggest reason for that is the scale that we're going for in this tree. Given this is so large, I figured it would be best if I left stairs, slabs, and trapdoors out of the equation so that I didn't get too lost in some of the smaller details, especially considering we're not really going to see any of those, especially from far away, and especially once we get all of the leaves and canopy in place. We may very well, however, still notice a lot of the twig-like branches that are represented through all of the fences that we have kind of shooting up towards the sky from all of the smaller little things that sprawl out from the main branches. I really need to work on my tree terminology here, but I think you get the idea. We have all of the little fences right there, and I think those will still be a little bit visible, intermixing throughout all of the leaves and other blocks that we use to kind of create that canopy up top. And so that was a detail that I definitely did not want to miss out on. It really, really helps to kind of fill up the space with a lot of those really, really, really thin little pieces that you'll often see kind of branch off of the ends of the branches. You know, every time it kind of hits an intersection, it gets a little bit smaller and a little bit smaller. and a little bit smaller, and then you kind of get to these really, really thin pieces right here. And that's really what makes up a lot of the top space up here. Now, I did consider trying to go a lot crazier with the fences and really start to fill out a lot of this space right here, but I figured at the end of the day, while I could fill this all up with more fences and really start to fill out this space right here with all of these tiny little thin branches, maybe even use some iron bars or something, most of that is not even going to be visible once we start to get all of the foliage in place. It covers most of it up, so why bother? Why spend all of the time on that and resources when you're not even going to see it? So I just kind of stuck with what might be a little bit visible, either from over here on the side, whether it's from the other side, or whether it's from directly below. Besides that, with the shape of the tree itself, I wanted to go for something that, of course, reached way over here to the left and kind of overtop the Witch Manor. That's been a big goal of mine throughout this whole process, is to build up the area down below to fit this big staple right up above it to kind of cap everything off and be the centerpiece in a lot of ways. Now, I have been using a reference for this build right here. I'm going to put it on screen. This is of a Jacaranda tree that I found online that I really, really enjoy the shape of. Now, obviously, that one is not on a slope like this one is, but I took a lot of the shape out of that one, both in the branches and the design, and then of course the canopy, which we'll get to in a bit, to really help shape this out. I wanted it to lean over top everything we have been building, like I've mentioned, and I thought this was a perfect candidate for a little bit of an inspiration on what kind of tree we could do here. Not only that, but I've also hinted at the fact that the foliage itself is not green like a normal tree, nor is it orange or yellow or red. No, we are going full purple and pink like you saw in the inspiration picture. So I tried to get something that was close to that lavenderish type of color, and while we don't really have a lot of that in vanilla Minecraft, I tried to make do with a handful of blocks that I think could do pretty well at trying to at least capture that lavender color, at least from a distance and at least at a glance. So previously, when we had built a really big tree over by our starter house, I went ahead and split that episode up into two. We did the tree and then we did the canopy after, because it was such a monumental task on its own. But I think we can chalk that up to being early game. I don't see any reason why we can't build this whole thing in one go. Well, we've done it. I can't believe it. It's taken so long, and I'm so happy with how it's turned out. I had planned this build in my creative test world and kind of tried to tweak everything to get it just right, but it's not quite the full picture until you see it actually in the world, actually having put it in here, and I think it turned out amazingly. I'm also really glad that we went ahead and decided to do all of the canopy in this episode as well, rather than waiting and doing it in another episode, because I think this tree tree is definitely best once you get all of that in place, rather than just leaving it bare with all of the branches. But the main goal here was to give this area that defining piece that just lingers over top and adds something to anywhere that you are focusing, whether it's the mushrooms, whether it's this tree stump detail, whether it's the house that we initially built. The idea is that there's always the bigger picture, which is lingering over top this huge tree that kind of helps sell the area, covers over top, and definitely makes it stand out from as far away as you would like to look at it from, as high as your render distance is. It doesn't matter. It's going to be there. It's visible. It's definitely going to draw your eye. Now, one of the things that I mentioned before was that I wanted to play around with some daylight shining through the canopy. And so we have some of these areas, like right here on this little pocket of water, right where we have this lily pad, where if you look directly up, we have this gap that goes all the way above the tree. I think there's one piece of glass in there that shouldn't affect it too much, and it just creates this extra little bit of daylight that can shine through. Actually, it's right there. There we go. There's the spot I was talking about, but you get the idea. It just kind of creates this little pocket of light surrounded by shadow. It's a lot like what we did with that singular flower underneath the first tree we built over by the house, if you can recall that. We've also got some similar instances like the pathway right here. It just kind of lights up that little extra bit, and for the most part, everything remains kind of dark under here, but you just get these beams of light. You just get these streaks of light that shoot through the canopy, and I think that helps sell it so incredibly well. There are areas where it gets pretty dark down here by the roots, and then we contrast it with those beams of light. I've even done it a little bit up in the branches themselves to try to get these differing areas of really dark branches covered by the canopy versus areas that are a little bit more illuminated, so that you can create this effect in such a way that you have this interesting variation that just kind of draws your eye from time to time. The more you look at it and the more you see these little details that just kind of help build the bigger picture. Now, one thing that you might have noticed, because I've definitely noticed it, is this fun little branch right here. So the idea behind this, at least the idea behind it staying there, is that all trees are kind of unique in their own way. There's no such thing as a perfect tree or an ideal kind of way to put a canopy together. That's kind of what makes trees so interesting, is that there are no two trees that are perfectly identical. And I felt like once I saw that form, that I was going to keep it, because it's a fun little quirk on the tree, and for the most part, you don't ever really notice it unless you're at a certain angle. And if we're down here, this is where you can really see it. It's just this one singular tiny little branch that kind of shoots out of here, and I could have filled this canopy a lot more right here, but by the time that developed, I thought, you know what? That's a fun little detail, and it kind of helps separate some pieces of the canopy and the leaves and whatnot, because at the end of the day, a big thing to keep in mind with building canopies and trees is that birds are going to be flying through it. At least that's kind of how you have to approach it, right? You have to leave these gaps, these spaces, to be able to navigate through it if you are a bird, for example, and you don't fill it up too much. And I went for a mix of that, as well as a kind of unique approach, at least with any trees I've built before. I went for a very airy sort of look to it, and by that I mean, in all of the areas where I put the leaves together, I left a lot of air gaps, a lot of really small air gaps, 1 block, 2 block, 3 blocks, and it turned into this almost checkerboardy at times sort of feel, where I would have a block and then an air block and then a couple blocks and an air block. And so it's not really bubbly, I guess, if that makes sense. Usually leaves might be kind of in a solid, maybe spherical pattern that you kind of do a bunch of times right next to one another, and then leave bigger gaps in between. I went for something a little different. I tried to kind of go a little more scattery with the air blocks and create this kind of fluffy, cloudy, kind of airy feeling, I guess is the best way I could put it. And I think it turned out pretty well for this tree in particular. I don't know that it would work too well if you get on much smaller of a scale, but given how absolutely enormous we went with this one, I felt like we could get away with it, and it would be a fun little way to put the canopy together. Something that I mentioned earlier in the episode as well was that I didn't go too crazy on the small branches, the little twig-like things that poke out at the very top, because a lot of it was going to be filled in by the canopy, which of course now you can see. And I think one of the important details is that we can still see all of the varying different sizes of branches on the bottom end right here where they might still be visible, because I think that adds a ton to the build. It was important that I didn't obscure all of the fence branches or all of these little single block branches or anything like that. I wanted to make sure that you could see everything from the roots to the trunk of the tree all the way up the main column of it, and then we have these kind of secondary branches, the tertiary branches, and then the little twig spruce fence-like ones as well. We get a little bit of a peek of that all throughout the bottom of the canopy, and I think that's such an important detail that can go overlooked and undervalued when it comes to selling the fact that it's a tree and it looks like a good tree at that. I think if we didn't have as much of that visible, we would kind of lose out on that quite a bit. After all, what is a tree without branches? I do think it's also important to get a lot of different perspectives of how the tree looks. So I'm way over here out to the side. This is kind of around where that old village used to be that we tore down previously. We've got all of this water right here, and you can even see our starter house off in the distance over yonder. So getting a bunch of different views of the tree I think is important as well. And this applies to really any build you do. You can never have too many different sight lines to kind of see how it's looking and coming together, or maybe how it's turned out once you're done. I think it can shed a lot of light on the different things you're doing, maybe things you're doing well, maybe things you could improve on, anything like that, or something as simple as just how it turned out and how it looks from different angles, because you can get a lot of pretty good screenshots, especially if you're building something as crazy as this. Here's another angle of it right here. This is the custom hill that we previously built right here. You can see the mushroom poking up, and then this is kind of like the straight on side view of it. This is kind of like that reference picture I showed a little bit earlier in the episode, at least in terms of perspective. Kind of have it leaning out to the left, and then we have the shape of the canopy kind of going a certain way, and you can see all of the branches and kind of how they intermingle and everything like that. I think this is the best view of the tree, and I'm probably definitely going to use this view for the thumbnail, so you'll probably have already seen that for this episode. This view right here is right next to where we have our sheep farm and moss farm. They're right up on top of this little plateau. You can see where I was farming a spruce tree right there, in comparison with the starter area over on that side as well. And then, of course, here's another view right here. You can see the grove over there. We've got the pathway that leads in. We're just a lot farther back over here in a largely untouched part of the world off in this direction over here. But again, you get another cool view of the tree right here. And I think one of my favorite parts about this build is that no matter where you look at it from, it just has these interesting characteristics, these interesting looks to the branches or the canopy, all these little details among the tree that differ so drastically based on how you're looking at it from all of these different angles. And I think no matter how you look at it, it still paints an equally as cool picture. And I think that's a telltale sign that we've done something pretty decent. I would hate to have built this and then have only one good angle of it and everywhere else just looks really weird and scuffed. So I'm glad that that's not the case. And with this tree finally having been built, this is, as a matter of fact, how we're going to cap off the grove right here, at least for the time being. We do have a pathway right behind my head right here that kind of leads out of it, and I do think that we'll eventually do something with that. But we have spent a number of episodes in this grove right here working on putting everything together, and I think it's time that we shift our focus to a new area. So here we are back where it all began. We have our house on this fun little piece of terrain, this little cliff face. We've got our tree, and we've got our Patreon forest right here. Now, I've talked about it a lot up to this point in this series, but this area right here is kind of a three-way border of this world and all of the build styles that we are going to put within it. Our house and this area right here with our little pathway, of course, being on the fantasy part of the world, which is kind of defined by this river right here, everything on this side of it where we are currently, all the way out to the ocean that way, all the way out to the ocean that way, and of course where we built the grove off in that direction. That separates our fantasy part of the world with this dark medieval part of the world over here, where of course we built the spire a handful of episodes back, as well as the bridge, which kind of fits that dark medieval theme a little bit more. And I kind of use that as a fun transition from the fantasy side all the way over to the medieval side there, which is of course defined by the river as well, just the opposite side of the river going that way. Now, I've talked about it a bunch up to this point, but those are only two of the three areas that we are going to have in this world, and I've hinted at it before, But the third divider is going to be the forest right here. All of these spruce or pine-like trees back here that represent all of our Patreon members. This forest, which will eventually fill out over time, is going to be our other border. You can see that it intersects with the river right here, and so it kind of works perfectly to divide 3 areas separate from one another. Now, of course, we've built in the fantasy area quite a bit. We've dabbled a little bit in that dark medieval area. However, we haven't really done too much on this side. I haven't even said what the style is going to be. The few things that we have done over in that area include our sheep farm setup and our moss farm / bone meal farm setup. It's also where I happen to be farming trees by hand. You can see some leftover acacia trees and a big spruce tree right there. Even a beacon, because I've been going down and getting tough and deep slate down in that area as well. Now, it's entirely possible that you have by now guessed what this third area style is going to be. Now, it is a little different from what you might expect because we have a fantasy area and we have a medieval area. This third area, not really going to fit in whatsoever, but I didn't want to tie us down to this world to kind of following too specific of an overarching style or time period or setting or anything like that, because at the end of the day, our goal is to learn how to become better builders first and foremost. We're not really telling an overarching continuous story in this world like I might do in some of my others. We kind of have different goals. So we have our dark medieval area, we have our fun fantasy area. This third area, where we've already started building some farms, this is going to be our industrial area. Now, that is going to be loosely used, the term industrial that is, because I think we're going to cover a number of different ways that we can build these industrial themes. I'm thinking everything from pre-industrial era styles to prime industrial era to modern to steampunk, anything that could kind of fit that factory or industrial sort of vibe. I kind of want to cover all of it. Heck, we might even throw a cyberpunk thing or two in there as long as it kind of fits that industrial theme. And I think this is going to be a perfect way for us to do all of our redstone projects in this world, all of our farms and utility things, much like what we did over yonder with the spire and how we turned that into our creeper and sugarcane output. We'll do that over here with things like our sheep farm, which will get covered up, our moss farm, which will have a building to it, everything else that we build out in this direction. I think it'll be a lot of fun to put all of that together, and I think one of the most important pieces of it was having distinguishing landmarks or land features that divide these areas so that they don't directly clash with one another by being built so close without anything to separate them. So I think because the factory industrial area is going to be the most jarring of the 3 when in comparison with the other 2, having an entire forest that separates it is going to play a huge part in making it work in this world. I think long term, what we might see happen is I, of course, have to expand this river further down that way. It does continue, although I'll have to work on terraforming a little bit to help it work a little better. I think this forest right here that we're looking at, which was naturally generated, will eventually evolve into a larger custom forest area. Now, I don't think that's all going to be Patreon trees because I don't think we're ever going to get that many people. However, I'm going to keep that to this area right here that I have cleared out, this little hill. And then over there, we're going to take liberties to do our own custom forest just for the heck of it over time to continue to help separate the 2 areas a little bit more distinctly. I'm really excited to get started on this third area. I have been planning a build or 2 well ahead of time. Even as far as 2 months ago, I got started on one of the builds over there. I've just been waiting for the right time to put it into an episode, and I cannot wait to get started on that because this third area has been a long time coming. That being said, I think right here on the shores of this lake right here where we have an insane view of the tree off in the distance is a perfect spot to wrap things up for the day. So as always, shout out to everyone who supports us over on Patreon. It's thanks to you guys that I can do this and put as much time into it as I can. And if any of you guys want to join, the link will be down in the description. And don't forget, you get your own custom tree in the world for being a part of it. You guys will have to let me know what you think of the tree that we built today, how it came together, what you like about it, if there's anything that you would tweak, if there's anything else you would add to the area, or if you have any ideas for the industrial area and different styles that we can include. Be sure to let me know down below in the comments. And as always, I hope you guys left today feeling just a little bit inspired.